I was standing in my late wife's closet when my whole world collapsed for the second time. The first time was 8 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in October, when Dr. Anita Chambers at Emory University Hospital looked at me over her glasses and told me that my wife of 39 years, Dorothy Mae Whitfield, had passed quietly in her sleep. The second time was right there, between her hanging dresses and the smell of her Chanel No. 5. When I pulled a box from the top shelf that I had never seen before. It was a shoebox. A plain white Nike shoebox sealed with 3 layers of brown packing tape. And written across the top in Dorothy's careful, schoolteacher handwriting. The same handwriting I had fallen in love with when she used to leave notes in my coat pocket were 4 words that turned my blood to ice. For the police only. I want you to understand something before I go any further. My name is George Elliott Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I built a reputation in this community on 2 things: my word and my patience. I attend Mount Calvary Baptist Church on Beatties Ford Road every Sunday without fail. I coached youth baseball at Double Oaks Recreation Center for 17 years. I am not a man who panics. But standing in that closet, holding that box, I felt my hands shake for the first time since I buried my wife. Before I tell you what was inside that box, and I will tell you everything, I need you to understand who Dorothy was. And I need you to understand who my son Marcus had become. Because this story didn't start the day I found that box. It started years before Dorothy ever got sick. She just had the wisdom and the patience to document every single moment of it, and the grace to let the truth speak for itself when she was gone. Let's go back to where the silence began. 18 months ago, Dorothy had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in April of the previous year. She took the news the way she took everything, sitting straight up in her chair, her reading glasses on, asking Dr. Chambers specific questions and writing the answers in her spiral notebook. That was my Dorothy. Precise, prepared, never theatrical. I was the one who had to excuse himself to the hospital bathroom to cry. We had been married since 1986. We met at Johnson C. Smith University right here in Charlotte, where she was studying education and I was studying civil engineering. She used to say that I built bridges and she built mines, and that between the 2 of us, we had Charlotte covered. She wasn't wrong. Dorothy spent 33 years as a 3rd-grade teacher at Thomas Barrow Academy, and there isn't a block in the West Charlotte corridor where someone doesn't stop me to say that Mrs. Whitfield changed their life. We had 2 sons. Marcus Jerome Whitfield, 41 years old, our firstborn, and Damon Elliott Whitfield, 38, our youngest, who lived in Houston, Texas, where he worked as an architect. From the outside, Marcus had everything. He was tall, handsome, charming in that easy way that makes strangers trust you before they should. He had taken over the family business, Whitfield Property Management, the company I built from scratch over 20 years, managing rental properties across Mecklenburg County. When I started stepping back at 60 to spend more time with Dorothy, I brought Marcus in to run the day-to-day operations. I gave him full signatory authority. I trusted him the way only a father trusts a son. That trust, I would learn, had been a gift he spent years cashing in. The first time I noticed something wasn't right was during the Thanksgiving of 18 months ago. Dorothy had been on her first round of chemotherapy for 7 weeks by then. She was tired, thinner, but still sharp as a tack. We were all at the house on Hovis Road. Marcus, his wife Kaisha, their 2 kids, and Damon, who had flown in from Houston. It should have been a beautiful afternoon. Dorothy had cooked their sweet potato pie from the hospital bed the week before and frozen it specifically for that day. She said she wasn't going to let cancer take her Thanksgiving. I remember watching Marcus at that dinner table. He was on his phone more than he usually was. He kept stepping outside to take calls, which he explained as business emergencies. But what I noticed, and what I filed quietly in the back of my mind, was that every time he came back inside, he looked at his mother with something I can only describe as calculation. Not love, not worry. Calculation. I told myself I was imagining things. A man doesn't want to believe the worst about his own blood. Dorothy noticed too. I know that now. After dinner, when Marcus and Kaisha had left and Damon was washing dishes, Dorothy asked me to sit with her in the bedroom. She held my hand for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "George, I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, don't rush to close anything out. Just watch. Watch everything, and trust Damon." I asked her what she meant. She smiled that small, specific smile she had, the one that meant she knew more than she was going to say right now, and told me to go check on Damon. I didn't push. I never pushed Dorothy. She always arrived at the truth in her own time, and she was never wrong when she got there. What I didn't know then was that she had already started building the box. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Dorothy went through 3 rounds of chemotherapy and 2 surgical procedures. Our house became a rotation of nurses, church mothers, and casserole dishes. Damon flew back and forth from Houston 8 times between January and September. Marcus visited on Sundays, always bringing flowers, always staying exactly 90 minutes, always leaving with the same excuse about needing to get back to handle things at the office. He handled things, all right. In February, about 4 months before Dorothy passed, our accountant, a man named Howard Tate, who had done our books for 15 years out of his office on West Trade Street, called me with a concern. He had been reviewing the quarterly statements for Whitfield Property Management and noticed 3 vendor payments that he couldn't match to any contracts in the files. Each one was between $8,000 and $12,000, paid to an LLC called Pinnacle Facility Solutions. He had never heard of them. I told Howard I would look into it and call him back. I asked Marcus about Pinnacle Facility Solutions the next Sunday. He didn't hesitate. He said it was a new maintenance vendor he had brought on, specialized in vacant roofing across multiple properties. He said he had meant to brief me, but things had been hectic with everything going on with Mama. He pulled out his phone, showed me what looked like a professional invoice, and looked me dead in the eye with those eyes that looked so much like mine. I believed him. God help me. I believed him. The invoice looked legitimate. The company name was real, or at least it appeared real. Marcus was my son. I was 63 years old, watching my wife fight for her life, and I did not have the emotional reserves to prosecute my own child over a business concern that had a reasonable explanation. But Dorothy, lying in that hospital bed, connected to a drip line with a spiral notebook open on her lap, had not made the same mistake. She had asked Howard Tate the same question I had asked. And unlike me, she had asked him to dig deeper. I know this because Howard told me, after Dorothy passed. After I found the box, he called me in tears. I want to pause right here and ask you something directly. If you discovered that someone you love, someone you raised, someone whose first steps you witnessed, someone you coached and sacrificed and prayed over, had been stealing from your family while your wife lay dying, what would you do? Would you confront him immediately? Would you go to the police yourself? Would you give him the chance to explain? Think about that. Because what George Elliott Whitfield did next will either make perfect sense to you, or it will teach you something new about what patience really looks like. Before we go further, if this story is already speaking to you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Drop a like and subscribe if you believe that the truth always finds a way. I'll be right here waiting for you. Dorothy passed on October 14th at 4:47 in the morning. I was holding her hand. The night nurse, a quiet woman named Priscilla, had stepped out for coffee. It was just the two of us in that room, the way it had been just the two of us at the beginning, in a small apartment on Beatty's Ford Road with $200 in a checking account and 30 years ahead of us. She didn't struggle. She just released, like she had finished everything she needed to do and was ready. I sat with her for 22 minutes before I called anyone. The weeks that followed were a blur of flowers and casseroles and obituary drafts, and Marcus stepping in to handle logistics in a way that felt helpful at the time. He coordinated with the funeral home. He called the insurance company. He was present in a way that, looking back, had a very specific purpose behind it. He wanted to know what was coming to him, and he wanted to position himself close to the process. Damon flew in from Houston the morning after Dorothy passed and didn't leave for 3 weeks. He slept in his childhood bedroom. He cooked breakfast every morning. He sat with me on the back porch every evening. He didn't talk much, but he was there, solid, steady, like a load-bearing wall. It was Damon who noticed the change in Marcus first. "Dad," he said one evening, about 2 weeks after the funeral, "has Marcus said anything to you about the business accounts?" I looked at him. "What do you know?" Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mama called me in August. Said she needed me to know something in case something happened before she could tell you herself. She said she'd put everything in a box. She said to make sure you found it before Marcus had access to the house." I stared at my youngest son. "She called you in August," I repeated. "Yes, sir." Dorothy had been 3 weeks from death in August. She was on hospice by then, barely eating, sleeping 18 hours a day. And in the hours she was awake, she had been making phone calls and building a case. That was my wife. That was Dorothy Mae Whitfield. I went to her closet the next morning. The box was lighter than I expected for what it contained. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a spiral notebook, one of the same green ones she used for her lesson plans, still carrying the ghost of her handwriting on the cover. WPM evidence file. Beneath the notebook was a manila folder, rubber banded shut. Inside the folder were printed bank statements, LLC registration documents printed from the North Carolina Secretary of State website, a series of handwritten ledger pages in Dorothy's meticulous columns, and a short handwritten letter addressed to me. I read the letter first. I'm not going to read it to you word for word, because those words belong to me and to God and to Dorothy's memory. But I will tell you what it said in substance. She had discovered, beginning in January of the previous year, 3 months before her own cancer diagnosis, that Marcus had created a shell company called Pinnacle Facility Solutions, LLC, registered at a UPS store address in Concord, North Carolina. Over 18 months, he had been routing payments from Whitfield Property Management to that company for services that were either grossly inflated or never performed at all. Dorothy had worked with Howard Tate quietly, without telling me, because she knew I would confront Marcus immediately, and she believed that a confrontation without complete evidence would only give him time to cover his tracks. She was right. She was always right. The total she had documented across 14 separate transactions was $247,300. $247,000. Siphoned from the company I had spent 20 years building, while my wife was losing her hair in a hospital bed, while I was driving her to Emory at 6 a.m. for treatment, while I was reading Psalms out loud to her because the medication made her eyes too tired to focus. My son had been stealing from us while we were fighting for her life. I sat on the floor of that closet for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still, because Dorothy had not put that box together out of rage. She had put it together out of love for me. She knew that if I found out on my own, through Howard, through a bank statement, through some accident, I would not handle it correctly. I would react. I would go to Marcus directly. And Marcus was charming and quick and had an answer for everything. So she built the case herself. She sealed it. She addressed it to the police. And she trusted that her husband, patient, methodical, dignified George Eliot Whitfield, would know exactly what to do when the time came. She knew me better than I knew myself. I stood up, dusted off my knees, and carried that box to the kitchen table. Then I called Damon. Then I called Howard Tate. Then, the next morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Givens, who had offices on South Tryon Street and who had a reputation in Charlotte's black professional community for being as precise as a scalpel and twice as sharp. I did not call Marcus. Patricia Givens did not waste words. She was 61 years old, a graduate of North Carolina Central University School of Law, and she had the kind of calm authority in a room that made you feel simultaneously protected and slightly afraid, the way you feel standing next to a very still, very large tree in a storm. Her office on South Tryon Street was decorated with framed photographs of her family, her NCCU diploma, and a single wooden plaque on the wall behind her desk that read, "The truth doesn't need your help. It just needs your patience." I noticed the plaque the first time I visited her office, 4 years ago, when Dorothy and I updated our estate documents. I thought of it as a nice sentiment. Sitting across from Patricia now, with Dorothy's shoebox on the desk between us, I understood it was a philosophy. She didn't speak for a long time after she finished reading the notebook and the documents. She sorted the pages, squared them neatly, replaced them in the manila folder, and set the folder down with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Then she folded her hands and looked at me. "George," she said, "your wife was an extraordinary woman." "Yes, ma'am," I said. She was. She documented everything correctly. Dates, transaction numbers, the LLC registration trace. She even pulled the registered agent filing, which most attorneys miss on first pass. Patricia tapped the folder. "This is not a suspicion. This is a case." I asked her what our next steps were. "First, we preserve everything and make copies tonight. Originals stay with me in a fireproof safe. Second, I'm going to need Howard Tate to formalize what he found into a written accounting statement. Third," she paused, "and I want to be clear with you about this, George, because I know this is your son we're talking about. Third, I am going to recommend that we contact the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office and a forensic accountant simultaneously before we do anything else." I nodded slowly. "Does Marcus have any current access to the business accounts?" she asked. That question hit me like cold water. I called Howard Tate from Patricia's office at 4:47 that afternoon. I noticed the time because it was exactly the same time Dorothy had passed. And I am not a superstitious man, but I felt her in that moment as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Howard confirmed that Marcus still had full signatory authority on the main Whitfield Property Management operating account at Truist Bank, branch on Tyvala Road. Patricia picked up her phone before I could say another word. She called the bank's legal department directly, identified herself, and within 23 minutes, Marcus Jerome Whitfield's signatory access to every Whitfield Property Management account had been suspended pending a fraud review. The accounts themselves remained open and operational. Tenant deposits, maintenance payments, all of it continued normally, but Marcus could not move a single dollar. I drove home that evening and sat on the back porch where Damon was waiting with 2 glasses of sweet tea. The sun was going down over the tree line on Hovis Road, painting the sky in shades of amber and deep rose, the kind of October sunset that Charlotte does better than anywhere else in the country. "It's in motion," I told him. Damon handed me my glass. "Mama knew you'd handle it right." We sat there until it was full dark. The following 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. Stranger, even, than the weeks after Dorothy's passing. Because during those weeks, I had to continue doing something that went against every instinct I had as a man who values directness and honesty. I had to act normal. Marcus called me every Sunday as usual. We talked about the business, about the properties, about a roof inspection that needed to be scheduled on a fourplex we owned on Statesville Avenue. He sounded relaxed, confident. He asked how I was eating. He mentioned that Keisha's sister was getting married in the spring and asked if I'd want to come. I answered every question. I asked about the grandkids. I said yes to the wedding. I sat on that porch with my phone pressed to my ear, and I performed 64 years of a father's voice with my son on the other end, all while Patricia Givens and a forensic accountant named Russell Webb were pulling apart every transaction Marcus had made over the past 3 years. What Russell found went beyond what Dorothy had documented. Dorothy, from a hospital bed with failing eyesight and a body fighting for its life, had identified $247,300 in fraudulent transactions. Russell Webb, working with full access to the company records and 18 days of analysis, found $391,750. The additional $144,450 came from a second shell company, this one called Meridian Building Services, LLC, registered in South Carolina under a variation of Keisha's maiden name that Marcus had apparently created after he became concerned that Pinnacle was drawing too much attention from Howard's quarterly reviews. He had simply opened a second pipeline, routed payments through a different account, and continued as before. He had been stealing from his parents for 3 years and 4 months. Russell Webb laid all of this out in a report that ran to 41 pages, with exhibit tabs and color-coded transaction timelines. I read every page twice. Not out of anger. I was past anger by then. I read it because I needed to understand the full shape of what had happened, the way you need to understand the full extent of a structural failure before you can make a decision about what to rebuild. Patricia presented the report to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, she called me to say that the DA had assigned a financial crimes investigator to the case and that an arrest warrant application was being prepared. I asked her how long. "A week," she said. "Maybe 10 days. George, I want to prepare you. When they move, they will move quickly and without warning. You need to be mentally ready." I thanked her and hung up the phone. Then I sat down at Dorothy's kitchen table, our kitchen table, and I did the only thing that had ever truly steadied me in times of crisis. I opened my Bible to Psalm 37, and I read it slowly, out loud in the empty house, with Dorothy's African violets still blooming on the windowsill because I watered them every morning the way she had taught me. Fret not thyself because of evildoers. Trust in the Lord and do good. The meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. I had read that psalm 100 times in my life. That morning, it read differently. It read like a set of instructions. I want to stop here and ask you something again, because I think about this often. At what point does protecting your child become enabling your child? At what point does a father's love become a father's blindness? I have asked myself those questions more times than I can count since that October. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that Dorothy saw what I could not see, or perhaps what I would not see. And I think that is the hardest part of this story for me to carry. Not what Marcus did, but the years he was doing it while I looked at him and saw only my son. If this story is touching something in you right now, something you've experienced in your own family, something you've been carrying quietly, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me what's on your heart. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories matter, and they matter more when we witness them together. The call from Patricia came on a Wednesday morning, exactly 9 days after she had filed with the DA's office. I was in the kitchen making grits, the way Dorothy made them, slow-cooked with sharp cheddar and a pat of salted butter, when my phone buzzed on the counter. "They're moving this morning," Patricia said. Arrest warrant was signed by Judge Patricia Howerton at 7:45 a.m. Detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit are executing it. Now, my hand tightened around the wooden spoon. "Okay," I said. "Are you all right, George?" I thought about that question for a moment. The grits were bubbling softly on the stove. Dorothy's violets were on the windowsill. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window at the angle it always came through in November, falling across the table where we had eaten 39 years of breakfast together. "I think so," I said. "I think I'm all right." Marcus was arrested at 9:14 a.m. that Wednesday at the Whitfield Property Management Office on West Moorhead Street. The office I had built, the office with my name on the door, the office where I had brought him as a 12-year-old boy to show him what his father had made and what could one day be his. He was charged with 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of embezzlement, and 1 count of money laundering through the use of fraudulent business entities. The total amount cited in the arrest warrant was $391,750. I know these details because Patricia told me. I was not there. I chose not to be there. Some people thought that was strange. Damon asked me about it that evening when he called from Houston, his voice careful, feeling out where I was emotionally. "Why didn't you want to be there, Dad?" I had to think about how to answer him correctly. "Because watching your son get arrested isn't closure," I said. "It's just an event. The truth coming out, that's the closure." Dorothy made sure of that. "The rest is just paperwork." Damon was quiet for a long time. "She really planned all of this," he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was wonder. "She planned everything," I said. "She always did." What followed the arrest was a different kind of hard. Kaisha called me that same afternoon. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying she didn't know. She didn't know about Meridian, didn't know about the money, didn't know the extent of it. I listened to her for 20 minutes without interrupting. When she was done, I said 2 things. I said, "Kaisha, I believe you." And then I said, "My grandchildren are not responsible for what their father did. Whatever happens between you and Marcus, that does not change." She cried harder after that, the way people cry when they've been bracing for cruelty and receive kindness instead. I understood that feeling. I had received unexpected kindness in the weeks after Dorothy passed, and it had undone me completely every time. The legal process moved with a slowness that required all the patience I had left. Marcus hired a private defense attorney, using, as best as anyone could determine, money from a personal savings account that had been outside the reach of the business fraud, which told me that even in his worst decisions, he had been calculating enough to maintain a personal reserve. That was the detail that stung most, somehow, not the amounts, the premeditation. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Patricia told me that was expected. "They almost always do," she said. "Give it 6 months. When the forensic accounting is presented in discovery, the plea changes." She was right again. It took 4 months and 11 days. On a Tuesday morning in March, Marcus Jerome Whitfield, through his attorney, entered a guilty plea to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of embezzlement, reduced from the original 4 charges as part of a plea negotiation. He was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $391,750 to Whitfield Property Management, LLC, and was permanently barred from serving as a signatory or officer of any company in which a family member held an ownership stake. I was in the courtroom that day. I sat in the 3rd row, on the left side, in the same dark navy suit I had worn to Dorothy's funeral. Damon sat beside me. Patricia sat on my other side. When the judge read the sentence, I kept my eyes on Marcus. He stood at the defense table in a charcoal suit, thinner than he had been, his shoulders slightly rounded, his hands clasped in front of him. When the judge finished, he turned, slowly as though he already knew, and looked at me. I did not look away. I did not frown. I did not nod with satisfaction or signal anger or grief or anything that could be read as victory. I just looked at him the way a father looks at his son when all the pretending is finally over. He looked down first. Outside the courthouse on East Trade Street, the March air was still cold enough that I could see my breath. A group of pigeons were working a discarded biscuit near the steps. Damon stood beside me with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the street. "So what now, Dad?" he asked. I buttoned the top button of my coat. "Now," I said, "we run the business right. We restore what was taken, not just the money, but the reputation. And we make sure that what your mother built means something." Damon nodded slowly. "You're keeping the company." "I built that company for my family," I said. "One member of my family betrayed it. But I still have family. I want to tell you about the last thing I found in Dorothy's box. The last item, beneath the notebook and the manila folder and the bank statements. I almost missed it because it was small, a folded piece of paper, no larger than an index card, tucked into the corner of the box beneath everything else. It was a note written in pencil, not pen. Dorothy wrote important things in pen and provisional things in pencil. This was pencil. It said, "George, I know you will want to grieve this twice. Once for what Marcus did, and once for the son you thought he was. Please only grieve it once. The son you raised is still in there somewhere. Whether he finds his way back to him is his work to do, not yours. You did everything right. You always did. I have that note in my wallet. I have carried it every day since I found it. I will carry it until they put me in the ground. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with Marcus. He completed the first year of his probation. He and Keisha are separated, though they co-parent the children, and I see my grandchildren every other Sunday for dinner. Marcus has not yet asked to see me alone. When that day comes, and I believe it will come, I am going to be ready. Not with anger, not with a list of grievances, just with the truth, and with the question that has lived inside me since the day I opened that box. What were you so afraid of that stealing seemed like the only answer? Because underneath the fraud and the shell companies and the carefully constructed deception, there is a man I watched take his first steps on the hardwood floor of a house on Beatty's Ford Road. There is a boy who cried at his grandfather's funeral and held my hand on the drive home. There is a son who, whatever he became, was formed by two people who loved him without reservation. Dorothy forgave him. She told me that in the letter. She said she forgave him in her heart before she ever put a single document in that box, and that the box was not about punishment. It was about protection. Protection for me. Protection for the business. Protection for Damon. Protection for the grandchildren who deserved an inheritance built on honesty. She built the case because she loved all of us, including Marcus. That is the kind of woman she was. I am 64 years old. I wake up every morning at 5:30 and I make coffee and I sit at the kitchen table where my wife and I shared 39 years of ordinary Tuesday mornings that I did not know were extraordinary until they were gone. I water her African violets. I read my Bible. I go to work. Woodford Property Management now operates with a full accounting oversight committee. 3 people, including Howard Tate Damon reviewing remotely from Houston once per quarter, and a third-party CPA firm on West Boulevard. We have rebuilt and restructured, and the business is stronger than it was before, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Because we know now exactly what to protect and exactly how to protect it. Damon has been talking about relocating from Houston. He has a project in Charlotte that's running through the end of the year, and I've made it clear that there is a seat at the table for him when he's ready. Not because I need him to fix anything. Everything that needed fixing has been fixed. But because Dorothy always said this family was the greatest thing we ever built together. And she was right, and I intend to honor that. There are days I walk past her closet and I stop. I don't go in. I just stop in the hallway and put my hand on the doorframe, the way you put your hand on the wall of a room that holds something precious. And I feel the weight of everything she did in that room during the last months of her life. Alone, in the middle of the night, when I was asleep down the hall, not knowing. She never told me she was doing it. She never burdened me with it. She carried that knowledge through chemotherapy and surgical recoveries and the slow, private work of preparing to die. And she channeled every bit of it into protecting the people she loved. If that is not the definition of strength, I don't know what is. If that is not the definition of love, I don't know what is. I found a box in my wife's closet. And inside it, beneath the evidence and the documents and the truth about my son, was one more piece of Dorothy herself. Her foresight, her love, her refusal to let lies outlive her. She made sure the truth was waiting for me. All I had to do was find it. Thank you for sitting with this story today. These are the kinds of truths that take courage to carry, and even more courage to share. If this touched something in you, if you've experienced betrayal in your own family, or loss, or the quiet weight of protecting people you love, I want you to know that you are not alone in that. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded today that patience is not weakness, and that the truth always finds its way home. Subscribe if you haven't yet, drop your like, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves out there.